The following is a conversation with Emma Storey-Gordon, also known as ESG. Emma is a lifestyle coach and a successful entrepreneur who's helped thousands of people transform their bodies, improving their body composition, and in doing so, allow them to live a healthier, happier, and longer life. This is Inside Matters. My name is Dr. James McElroy. I hope you enjoy it.
Anyway, sorry, you don't drink anything at all?
I always say I don't not drink, but I don't tend to drink. Like it's not like a rule of mine.
So every now and then you have a little something. What would be your drink of choice?
Probably a margarita.
Oh, really?
Yeah, spicy.
Woo.
Like it's the most basic.
It's quite basic. You're in Starbucks. What did you have in Starbucks?
Oat latte.
Oat milk latte, not a pumpkin spice latte.
No.
You see the kind of tracking going down.
Next level basic. Yeah,
you see the tracking going down. So tell me how you got into the fitness industry.
I think I got into it from just, not being that good at school and then liking sport. So then my mum was like, no, obviously everyone should go to uni after school. That's what people do, right? So then why don't you just do sports science? And kind of like that's how I got into the fitness industry. And then while doing sports science, I became far less interested in sports science and far more interested in like health science and how exercise could improve health or longevity and in disease states as well. So particularly type 2 diabetes. And then what I really wanted to do, and still do, and maybe I will at one point, but was open a diabetes clinic and help people with diabetes exercise. But there was like a significant flaw in my business plan, which is that they actually didn't want to exercise or pay, shockingly, to have the pleasure of me exercising them. So that didn't really work. And then there were a lot of people that did want to work with me. So then I just focused on them.
We should definitely, and we will talk more about your journey, but why do people not like to exercise, in your opinion? Because it makes you feel good, right?
It makes you feel good, right? And I do think there needs to be an awareness of like, when you're very overweight, it's not enjoyable to exercise. It's not enjoyable to move. It's not enjoyable to do a lot of things. So I think a lot of the time it's like, yeah, sure, you get an endorphin rush from exercise, but it isn't the same for everybody. And I think there are quite a lot of barriers, or even just like feeling uncomfortable, or the gym being an intimidating environment for some people. And we know, right, that once you get in the gym and everyone's actually really supportive and people are all there for their own reasons, and most people looking at like the overweight person in the gym are like, that's amazing, like, well done for being here. But then you can interpret that of like, oh, they're judging me for being here, or I don't look the same as other people. So I think a lot of it's self-imposed, but I think the awareness that actually exercise isn't that enjoyable and sometimes quite painful, and often not modified in the right way for very overweight people to start, like having a starting point.
Right. So if someone came to you and they were really, really overweight, what would you do? First of all, they've come to you, so that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, huge first step. And I think, again, people don't appreciate that actually reaching out to someone for help. I mean, we often see it in terms of therapy. People like, that's amazing that you've actually said, I have a problem, I'm going to go get help. That's a huge first step.
That's a good point.
But going to a personal trainer is quite similar for a lot of people. Like, weight loss is something that people struggle with their whole life. And actually saying, do you know what, I'm ready to make a change here, is a huge first step. So that's amazing. And then if someone is very overweight and they have, depends on their goals obviously, but they have a weight loss goal, then I would probably focus primarily on like walking and nutrition to start with, and then some exercise that they don't hate. And I think this is the other thing, it's unrealistic for everyone to love exercise, but you can certainly find something that you don't hate. And then actually as you lose weight and you realize, oh, there's actually quite cool things my body can do that I didn't expect them to be able to do, then often you fall in love with that process and you're like, oh, it's really cool. Like, you've obviously got your powerlifting background. Like, how amazing was it to be like, this is a weight that my body has never been able to lift, and I never thought it was possible to do this.
Right.
But that for someone else might be like, I don't know, doing a body weight squat or something like that. Like, it could be quite simple, but they're like, oh wow, now this actually feels quite good.
Right. And do you tailor your advice depending on like, you know, how overweight someone is, or is it really just walking more and getting some positive or a negative energy balance? What is it, negative?
Negative
You want to
energy
be
balance.
negative
Yeah,
energy
yeah.
balance.
If you want to
be
lose
positive
weight,
energy balance. That's if you want to gain muscle.
Yeah.
So do you tailor it based on how they come in, or is it the same basic?
Yeah, I meet people where they are and take them where they want to go, basically. So if someone comes to me and they're like already in great shape, but they want to push it to the next level, that's obviously a very different situation than someone who is coming to me and is like, I'm overweight, I've never done exercise, I know I need to do this for my health.
Right.
Where do I start? And that's, to me, much more interesting because there's a lot of barriers to break down and there's a lot of misconceptions to iron out. And I think people would be amazed at how little you can do and have this incredible impact on your health in terms of movement and exercise. And I've never fully been able to articulate this well, but the benefit that you get from, say, going from like 1,000 steps a day because you're very, very sedentary to 3,000 steps a day, which is still very low activity levels, is massive. Like that benefit you get is huge. But if you're someone who's like doing 10,000 steps and they're increasing the same amount, 3,000 to 13,000 steps, that health benefit you get is like pretty negligible, right? So whereas people often think of that the other way around, they're like, if I can't do a full hour in the gym, there's no point going. If I can't hit my 10,000 steps, no point doing anything. I'm like, there's actually even more point. Like the less active you are, the more point there is making that little bit of effort to do a little bit more. But we get so fixated on these targets, and it's such a strange like cognitive bias, I guess, that we have as humans, that if we don't hit this target, we're like, there's no point doing anything.
That's fascinating. So the small incremental changes during the early days when you're just getting started to move you from whatever it is, a very, very low level of fitness, a really, really bad diet, taking that first step has like an outsized impact.
Massively. So, I mean, a lot of things follow this law of diminishing returns, right? Exercise especially, like those first sort of like, in fact, there's even research to show the first hour of exercise you do per day, huge benefits. Sorry, not per day, per week. Yep. That's the point, is per week. And then even like, if you think of your own training, like the first 3 workouts you do a week, like they're really good use of time and you're getting a huge benefit from that. When you take it from 3 to 6, like you're still getting a benefit. It's not the law of no returns. It's just diminishing, right? It's not as productive. And then when you go past that, you're like, don't even know if I'm recovering from this anymore. Yeah. And then actually that's when it kind of slopes down. So you can do too much of a good thing. Yep. And if you put that in different contexts, so for example, the first hour of work that you do when you sit down to do some work, mega productive. Second hour, you still get more done, but like your concentration span is like going. The third hour, it's like I just sat here looking at a blank piece of paper, like nothing really happens.
You've hit a wall.
Yeah. So again, and most things do follow this law of diminishing returns, like too much of a good thing is no longer a good thing. But what people forget about that is that like really sharp increase at the start of that. Like actually, if I gave you 20 minutes to do a work block, you'd get a ton done in that initial sort of 20-minute period. Right. Same with like the benefits you're getting from the first 20 minute of exercise that you do. Even in your workout, like you can make this smaller. You're probably getting the vast majority of the benefits from your workout from the first 20 minutes. And then the rest is like still beneficial, but nowhere near as impactful.
Interesting. And for someone that is really overweight, is it the case that high intensity to them is different to high intensity for somebody else? So although they don't feel or they don't perceive themselves to be working as hard as the other people in the gym because they're running faster or they're doing more reps or whatever, for them, because they're just getting started, it actually is probably equivalent, and they should just be quite comfortable with the fact that they're going to get to the running fast or whatever over time.
Yeah, it's all relative, isn't it? So like my 1 rep max is probably a lot less than your 1 rep max, but it's still my maximal effort.
Right.
So yeah, like same with kind of HIIT training, like HIIT for some people might be walking a little bit faster.
And for the listener, that's high intensity.
High intensity interval training, yeah.
We're usually talking about microorganisms and gut, liver, brain axis and things like that. I think most people know what HIIT is, but I'll just try and contextualize. So when someone comes into you that is overweight, we've talked about getting moving. What about the diet? And is there any optimal diet? Big question.
Definitely gut microbiome.
Definitely one that focuses on the gut microbiome. But interestingly,
probably Mediterranean style diet.
It's probably the same
Oh, yeah.
It's probably the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what's interesting in the fitness industry. So for listeners like who probably aren't in the fitness industry, we've gone very much, although you've maybe seen this on like mainstream media, towards calories are all that matter.
Yes.
And you just need to be in a calorie deficit. Now, there is an element of this that is true, as in you will lose fat if you're in an energy deficit, because fat is the body's primary store of energy. If you eat less than you consume, then that energy has to come from somewhere. It comes like from primarily your fat, right? There might be a bit of lean tissue lost as well and some glycogen stores, but whatever. You will lose body fat if you're consistently in a deficit. But then what people don't consider is like what people are eating anymore. And I kind of like the calorie deficit message, because so many people used to get fixated on like never having carbs, or like never ever having a burger, or never having food that they enjoy. And that was really over restrictive, or like pushing sort of like clean eating, and that kind of turned into orthorexia and people being scared of eating.
What's
like,
orthorexia, sorry?
I don't know the exact definition, right? But it's essentially, it's when people become obsessed with their health to the extent that it's negative for them. So like I'd be like terrified that, I don't know, something we ate at lunch might have like had some oil in or something, right? And I'm like, oh, was it was it natural olive oil or like blah, blah.
Got it.
So it's just like the over.
I understand.
Yeah, getting kind of neurotic about health.
You've gone to the opposite end of.
Yeah, you've gone too far.
You've gone too far. Yeah.
But then I think to counteract that, we've maybe gone too far the other way of being like, it doesn't matter what you eat, just be in a deficit. Now, if fat loss alone was all you cared about, then you could argue that's a good message. But I would, even within that, not argue that, because actually sticking to, I don't know, let's say a 500 calorie deficit, if you're eating primarily whole foods and or a decent amount of protein, actually quite easy to do. If you're trying to do that while eating primarily highly processed junk food, which is like very Moorish and not particularly satiating, actually a really hard thing to do. So they kind of both are more related than people make out. It's not just what you eat or how much you eat. It's like they impact each other.
You're speaking about this if it fits your macros type movement.
Yeah.
Popularized probably about 10 years ago.
Yeah. Pop-Tarts.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And it was just like, to contextualize it, it doesn't matter what you eat so long as you hit your target calorie number, your protein, your fat, and your carbohydrate number. And really, it doesn't matter what the makeup is of those macronutrients and what's on your plate and going into your mouth, so long as you hit those numbers.
Yeah. So in context of that, like having a big plate of veg might be the same in that context as like a, I don't know, sort of like a Pop-Tart or something, right?
In terms
like
of calorie
high sugar.
content. Yeah.
Yeah. Or just like, well, I hit my carbs, but like what were the carbs made up of? And like how satiating was that? How much food volume did you have?
Yep.
What's the impact on your gut microbiome? All these stuff.
Well, we can talk about the microbiome piece. But before I do that, a thought experiment for you. If you had two people and they were the exact same genetically, so you'd cloned them, and all other factors and variables were the same, training probably being the most relevant one, but all other environmental stimuli are the same. And one of them was having a, if it fits your macros, Pop-Tart heavy, Haribo heavy, chocolate heavy, McDonald's heavy diet. And the other one was having the beautiful Mediterranean, microbiome friendly, high fiber, micronutrient dense, minimally processed food. Would their body composition look the same, or would they be different?
Okay, so I think, and this is just in terms of body composition, because we kind of already spoke about like skin, hair, nails probably look better if you're having like a Mediterranean style diet versus just eating processed foods. Their body composition would probably be similar, at least short term. I would imagine that would impact like your mood, which would impact your training intensity, which would impact your motivation. Like it will all have impacts. But in terms, like I imagine for a period of time at least, body composition would be relatively similar. The other thing that people forget about, but I also don't speak about that much because I think it often overcomplicates the message, is the caloric availability of food. So if you're eating primarily whole food that has high fiber, high protein, you actually don't fully absorb as much of those calories as you do processed foods. So if I ate 200 calories worth of Mars bar versus 200 calories worth of, I don't know, broccoli or something higher in protein, maybe like a chicken breast or something.
Right.
I don't actually absorb the same amount of calories from both, even though they are the same calories.
Oh, interesting.
So there's that impact as well. And I guess over time that might add up. So the person who's eating 2,000 calories of whole foods might actually be absorbing less than the person who's eating 2,000 calories of like quote unquote junk food.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that is upset is, I don't know if it's the right word or the wrong word, but kind of upset me with it, if it fits your macros, is yes, people are doing it to improve their body composition. Many people have a drive to get healthier more generally. And in adopting the if it fits your macros approach, you might be improving your body composition, which in turn improves your overall health and well-being, but you're not doing what's optimal for your health. You know, you need a high fiber diet with the right kind of fats, with minimal sugar to be at your healthiest. So you might actually be shortening your lifespan in adopting the if it fits your macros approach. And you probably feel a bit rubbish.
Yeah. And it's hard because a lot of these effects, like a lot of the effects of health aren't like immediate, right?
Yeah.
So you can see the almost immediate effects of changes in body composition. Like, you know, it might take me 12 weeks to lose this amount of fat, but like that's pretty immediate. You don't know the impact of 12 years of sticking to this kind of diet, or like the long-term impacts of eating. Like we know that now there's like a link between highly or processed meat and certain types of cancer and things like that. Well, actually, there's probably a lot that we don't quite know yet. And those things are so hard to study that if we have mechanistic rationale for it, I'm kind of like, I'd rather just like stick to a diet. And like you said, it actually makes you feel better.
Yep. How has your diet changed over the years? And we should bring it back to, you did sports science, but we're getting technical now and getting into the detail, which we definitely should do. But back to your journey. So the sports science thing happened. Was this at Edinburgh Uni?
Yeah. So when I was at Edinburgh, I did sports science and I was really involved in athletics. And when I did that, I actually didn't think about my diet at all. And then I got quite into rowing and I was learning like sports nutrition, sports performance nutrition. So it was quite like carb heavy.
Yep.
And then I remember finishing rowing for the season and I'd really hurt my back and I decided I wasn't going to go back. And I was like, I'm going to get in incredible shape. And this was the time when it was like cool to be like a sponsored athlete.
Right.
So I was like, I said to my flatmate, I was like, I'm going to get a sponsorship from like a supplement company. And he was like, yeah, whatever.
Is that not cool anymore? No.
I don't think it's really, now it's more just like influencers who get that kind of stuff. But anyway, I was in when it was cool, right?
Yes.
So that
you were sponsored by somebody. Hold on a second. Let me think about this. Why is USN?
Yes.
Was it USN?
Yeah. Impressed. Yeah.
It's in my head.
So I worked with them for a while.
Funny. Yeah.
But the whole point was you had to be in shape, right? So all I did was cut carbs. Now, there's no like secret behind that. I just was creating a calorie deficit. But because it was such a huge element of my diet, and I've never been one that particularly likes being over analytical about especially food. I think it can, like, for some people it works really well, but for me it was never something that I particularly wanted to do. So if I was just like, well, I'm not going to eat carbs, it actually made it so much easier just to cut calories without thinking about cutting calories. So that's what I did. And then I got in shape and then I started doing a bit of like fitness modeling and stuff. And I went down that route for a while. And then I remember a really weird diet that I used to do called carb backloading. Did you ever do this?
Yep.
So that was great because you could basically binge eat and then say it was part of your diet.
You're bringing back so many memories for me. Now, let me just think about this one. So the carb backloading was developed by this guy who was a physicist.
Kiefer,
yes.
I can't remember his first name.
I can't remember either. And he said, well, because of all this hormonal metabolic stuff, you should have all your carbs at night. Do
you know what though? I loved the science behind it, even though it wasn't legit.
What was this? So is the science legit or not?
I mean,
because I don't know.
Like, so it kind of like it makes theoretical sense, right? So his whole thing was you don't eat carbs all day, so you're very insulin sensitive by the evening, and then you were meant to train before you ate the carbs, right? And the training
your sensitivity even more
increases insulin sensitivity, but also GLUT4 regulators would come, like, you know, would be more on the surface of the cell, which means that this was the theory. Those calories that you ate or the carbs that you ate would only go into your muscle, couldn't be stored as fat, right? Obviously.
Yes.
Because that's how it works.
Because it'd be so sensitive they just suck it all up.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So,
okay.
But what was interesting in looking back on it now is I was like, it was easier for me to stick to that because I had some kind of theory behind why it was working, rather than just being like, you need to be in a calorie deficit. I was like, oh, no. I have to be quite like strict with this because I need to keep my insulin sensitivity during the day, and then I'll train, and then at night, like, you know, I'd be eating like pastries and stuff at night.
I was just about to say, I think he recommended pastries.
Yeah, he did. He was like, one of them was like some kind of
pastries.
cherry pastry. I never managed to find it.
I'm laughing so much because you've just brought back all these memories of me being at the Aberdeen University weightlifting club with all the other people that were there. We were doing the carb backloading thing. We trained really hard, and then we all sort of invariably went to the supermarket and bought these cream-filled, apple or raspberry-filled pastry things and just ate like 5 or 6 of them. Now, in hindsight, that is not a healthy way to live your life.
No, absolutely not. And then I think actually, it wasn't so bad for us because we were already quite lean, could probably completely handle that glucose load, you know, and we were obviously within like sort of energy balance ranges. Why I'd be really worried about it now or promoting it to people who kind of like weren't in that situation is that a lot of people struggle with binge eating or massively overeating in the evening, to the extent that it becomes like quite uncontrollable, and then to the extent that it can sometimes lead to eating disorders. That's almost the encouragement of binge eating. Like, restrict yourself all day and then eat as much as you want afterwards.
Not healthy.
Yeah.
So carb backloading's a no.
Probably not. Probably not.
Not a
Something
good
I
one.
should, no.
But you were doing it for a while. What else have you tried? Everything.
To be honest, not that much. I think I was quite lucky with who I was surrounded with.
Right.
And that I've got like quite a logical mind. I did read a book. I can't remember what it was called, but it was about this type 2 diabetic. And anyway, I got like really into this book, and I was like, I'm just going to cut all my carbs because this has changed this guy's life. And I remember being on holiday at the time, my mum being like, but Emma, you're not type 2 diabetic. And I was like, oh shit. Like, you know, when you get so sucked into something, I was like, oh, carbs are the worst thing. And like, obviously this guy, it did completely change his life. And I was like, well, maybe, you know, like maybe that's what I should be doing. And I guess it's just a good reminder to be like, you know, like think of your own goals or the own situation that you're in, because generic health advice is generic and it might not be suitable to you where you are. And that's why it's really hard to give out like good, solid advice. And like government advice is often criticized, but can you imagine how hard that would be to be like, right, the whole population need to do X is actually quite a tough thing.
It would be hard, but could we do a better job?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we should talk about how we could do a better job. I mean, one of the frustrations I think people have, and I'll use my dear mother as an example, is that sort of 1 week it's fat is just terrible for you. Don't have any fat. And I can remember when my granny was still around, it was don't have more than 3 eggs or something like that, or that was the thing at the time. And then it became sugar's really bad. I think probably sugar isn't great. And then it was like meat's really bad. And we seem to just sort of go through phases of, well, that's really bad. But is anything really that bad? Is there anything that we should just avoid at all costs? And why does it keep changing? Is it new research or is it?
I think, honestly, if there was something that was really bad to the extent you should cut out of your diet completely, we'd already know about it. Now, I would say included in that is things like, do you need to be having processed meats? Yeah. I mean, in moderation, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. The other thing that people don't really like to talk about, but alcohol is also a carcinogenic. Like, people don't really like to hear that. And they're like, oh, but there's, you know, good things in wine as well. I'm like, yeah, there is. But, you know, if we're talking about these things, that comes much higher up than like eating bread now and again or something. And I don't really know why we feel the need to demonize certain food groups so much, because like that isn't the answer. And all the research suggests that isn't the answer. And actually it's the weight loss that benefits people when it comes to like health outcomes. almost independently of how they achieve that. Now you could go high carb or low carb. And even in diabetes, which is often seen to be like you should be low carb, the research suggests that whether you lose the fat on a high carb diet or a low carb diet, you get the same benefits.
Really?
Yeah. So it's the fat loss as opposed to the carbohydrate that's the problem. Where that's sort of disputed is like short term. So obviously if you just cut carbs, your HbA1c would go down, or like your fasting glucose would go down pretty like almost immediately. But if you lose weight, even on a high carb diet, you still get the same benefits in terms of diabetes progression or hopefully regression.
Fascinating. So if you were to condense all the latest and best scientific evidence of wisdom into some key take-home messages for people relating to diet and nutrition, what would it sound like? Like what would it be?
I think a couple of things. So I'm going to make some of these quite practical. So eat in accordance to your energy demands. So if you're someone who's very active, you'll need more energy. If you're a small woman who works in an office, you're going to need less energy. That's easier said than done because of the environment that we live in. Like we live in this obesogenic environment. When we get, for example, we just went out for lunch.
Yes.
We had,
It was very nice. Oh, go on, just say it.
I was going to say
2 lunches.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise anybody.
Right. So you actually had 2. So this guy actually doesn't really prove my point very well, but
one was a salad.
One was a salad.
Yes.
Yeah, well
Just
done.
wanted to sort of put that.
But let's say we had because we ordered the same thing, right? But that's a much higher percentage of my total energy intake for the day than it is yours because you're a bigger human than me. Like, let's say that our step count was the same kind of thing. So actually being a small woman in the environment that we live in makes it very hard for you to actually stick to your energy demands, especially if you want to like eat out and not have to stress about that kind of stuff.
Fascinating. Because the portion size is the portion size. It's not tailored to how big you are or how active you are and so on and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'd get huge kickback if it did. They were like, oh, you're quite short. Do you know what? You're only having 1 egg and you can have 2. Like it would be this whole whatever.
That I don't know if that one should feature in our government advice revamp.
No, maybe not.
But
what, the waiter like eyes you up and it's like, can I see your Fitbit? How many steps have you done today?
do you even lift kind of thing?
Yeah. That would be the first one is eat in accordance to your energy demands, which I get is easier said than done. And then the second one would be eat primarily whole foods and limit your highly processed foods. Not completely, not to the extent that you're going to worry about, like every now and again having something that you fancy. I think, like I said before, that can turn into quite a negative relationship with food. And
the whole foods then, just to kind of contextualize, are things that haven't been processed. So like an apple, a banana, a lettuce leaf.
Yeah, the thing is, apart from those examples, like most things have been processed like to an extent. So like milk, I wouldn't be like, oh, avoid milk, it's highly processed. But it has been processed. And like bread, I don't think is inherently bad, but again, like it has been processed. So what I mean by like I would avoid ultra highly processed food. So things like Mars bars or like donuts that are covered in glaze and all that kind of stuff.
Beef jerky. Yeah. They do taste good though, don't they?
What, beef jerky?
No, the donuts and the...
Yeah, I mean, they do taste good.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying never have them, but
good.
Have them in moderation.
Is there any particular time that people should have them? Not the carb backloading type thing, that after exercise...
Starve yourself all day and then that's literally the worst thing you could possibly do is to like restrict yourself all day.
But is that not the intermittent fasting type approach?
And again, I think for a lot of people that's just binge eating, or it turns into that. Like for some people, one thing I do agree with intermittent fasting is a lot of people almost never stop eating all day. So they're never in like, they're constantly like postprandial, right? They're constantly like digesting or something.
Right.
And I do think that there should be a period of time when your body can just kind of come to like equilibrium.
Just chill, yeah.
And then like, okay, then the next meal is there and you don't have to constantly like always be snacking.
It kind of makes sense that the sort of cellular spring cleaning, the sort of, processes where the body just boots out things that aren't working too well, repairs certain things, happen when it's not trying to extract energy and amino acids and things like that from food.
Yeah, and I think you're like, even your glucose levels and insulin levels should be allowed to come back to kind of like baseline and just level out on their own. And like, I think we snack too much, which would probably be my last tip actually, to reduce the amount of snacking that you do. Like, not completely eliminate it, but maybe be a bit more mindful about it, because I think anyone who's trying to lose weight, generally when I speak to them, they're like, yeah, I have a really good breakfast, lunch, dinner, like I make such a big effort with these things, and then I'm like, what about in between? And they're like, oh yeah, like I kind of just like pick at stuff, and I think that's my problem. And it's like, yeah, actually you're doing really well and putting in so much effort, and then letting yourself down a little bit in between, and that stuff is all, like a lot of the time completely like mindless, like they wouldn't really remember. But I'm like, do you ever like just pick up bits off your kid's plate? And like, oh yeah, I do kind of do that. Or like, did you have anything in the office today at all? I'm like, no. And like, no biscuits with tea. And they're like, oh, like, yeah, okay, a couple of biscuits with tea. So those little things, that's what often adds up. And the thing is, you often don't enjoy them that much because you're grabbing it as you're leaving the house, or you didn't really want it, but you're like, oh, I don't want like half a chicken nugget to go to waste, so I'll just use my body as a bin kind of thing.
I've never heard that before. Use my body as a bin. But it makes sense.
I feel like my dad does that a lot, and I'm always like to him, like, you don't need to finish like everyone's plate.
Not a bin.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. And I suppose if you do make sure that every plate is empty, you're going to be consuming a fair few calories, aren't you? So those are some really, really good tips. What if someone wants to go to the next level and they're doing the basics and they want to really start to look very good, or they want to maybe compete in something, or they want to be just the best version of themselves? Where do they go next? They've got the basics down. What's next?
I don't think in terms of diet you need to do that much more. So I would make sure that you've got enough protein in, and then you're eating primarily whole foods, and you're eating in accordance to your energy demands, and within that, like, your goal. So if your goal is to lose body fat, like, you're in a deficit.
How do people know what their energy demands are?
And this is a very hard question, right? So you'll have, like, there's hundreds of calorie calculators on the internet. None of them are accurate, but they often hopefully give you a sensible starting point. And the only way, and I can't emphasize this enough because it's a question I get all the time, the only way you will ever know what's going to work for you is to live it. And realistically, it's not as accurate as what people think. Like, today I'll probably burn less energy than I did yesterday because I'm not going to move as much because we're driving after this, right? Whereas I walked a lot yesterday, so I would have burnt more energy. So it's always like an energy balance that will fluctuate every day. The next question I then get is like, well, do then I need to change my calories every single day? Like, no, that's why we have the ability to store energy, so that when you have a little bit less, you can build up your own energy stores. And then when you take in too much, that's also stored. So you need to think about like average over time, as opposed to like specific targets per day and get stressed out about the exact targets per day. We just don't have accurate enough data. And even if we did, it's not a fun way to live. So what I would do is start with a basic calorie calculator, which will ask you to put in some very generic information, and it will give you what I would hope is a sensible start point. Often it's not a sensible start point, but that's often user error, because people are like,
they've overestimated or they underestimated movement, or
sometimes that, although the movement element isn't very accurate, because it's like, are you highly, moderate or low activity? And it's like, what does that even mean?
Right.
Nobody really knows, right? So that's an issue in itself. But even with that, like, often there's a question after that says something like, do you want to lose fat slowly, moderately or fast? And who's going to be like, I want to lose fat slowly? Like, no, you're like, oh, could I have the result now?
I want it all off and I want it now.
Exactly. So they'll normally pick fast, which often means that they have unrealistically low calorie targets that they can't stick to.
People do some kind of crazy things, don't they?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I go to this place every evening called the Western Baths, and there's always sauna chat amongst the guys. And one of the guys was like, oh God, I'm feeling a bit faint. I was like, why? He's like, oh, I've not eaten anything today. I was like, right. You're doing some diet? He's like, oh, well, I'm just starving myself because I'm going on holiday in 2 weeks.
Nice.
And I didn't bother saying, maybe you should have started 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But people, quite commonly, I think, they want to lose it as fast as possible and give themselves a very, very, very short window, right? It's like, oh, right, better start now. But really, the healthier way would be the slow and steady.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that I work with primarily women who have yo-yo dieted their whole life. And
the yo-yo diet means you go up?
Just so you go up, you go down. Basically, exactly what you've described. They're like, oh my God, I've got an event coming up, so I'll drop my calories to 1,000 a day. And then they end up massively overindulging after that because they've over-restricted. Typical kind of like yo-yo pattern.
And does that explain why so many people are quite successful in losing weight sometimes, but then they go back up so quickly?
Yeah, and I think that part of that is the definition of what a successful diet is. So in research, it's coming back 6 months later or a year later to see who's maintained that weight loss, right? Which is how we should define a successful diet, not can I starve myself for 12 days and see what happens?
Interesting.
Like, that's not impressive to me. I think it used to be. I used to be like, wow, look at this transformation photo. Or, oh my God, you've lost this much in such a short period of time. And it was almost like I was more impressed with the shortest time possible. And now I'm like, if you tell me you lost 10 pounds and you come back next year and you've still lost 10 pounds, that's incredible. Like, that blows my mind. If you tell me you lost 10 pounds in 12 weeks, I'm like, come back and eat. Like, let's see where you are in 6 months.
Yeah.
And if you've been able to maintain that, that's far more impressive. So I think one of the ways to get around that yo-yo dieting is to point that out to people, that if you go over restrictive and you yo-yo diet, you actually tend to make the process take longer because you have to start and stop again. And actually you're just going up and down around the same level. Yep. Whereas if you take it slow and steady and you're consistently coming down, it's slower per unit time, but you're getting the result that you can actually maintain as well because you've learnt the process along the way.
Got it. So what do you advise then for the women who typically come to you, who've been yo-yo dieting? What are their goals and what is your toolkit to help them succeed? So
usually people come and they have this restrictive mentality of I need to drop my calories, or I need to cut these certain food groups, or I can only eat this. And then also kind of false expectations of the rate at which weight loss should happen, and like a lack of understanding about the scales, especially around menstrual cycle. So for example, if I lost, 2 pounds of fat over a week on the first week of my diet, but I also was premenstrual, so I put on 3 pounds of water weight during that time. Looks like I put on a pound, but I've actually lost 2 pounds, right? So letting those little things trip you up is like a big hurdle for people. And when you zoom out, that's mad. Like, it's mad that you're letting this number on the scales, even though you have made progress, tell you that you haven't, and then you give up. Like, it's crazy. But anyway, that's a huge problem.
On the scales, do you advise people to weigh themselves every day or every week or
So I'm a little bit different than most of the industries. I get people to weigh themselves every single day, first thing in the morning, and then I take the lowest weight of the week as their weight.
Okay. Because
the way I see it, you can fluctuate up, but unless you've had like sickness or diarrhea or something, like you're not going to fluctuate down.
Got it.
So and then I don't really care what they are per week. What I care about is zooming out and being like, what's the trend here? Because inevitably, when you're working with women, it will go up at certain times of the month. Usually there's like 2 peaks in the month of like slightly higher weight.
And when women come to you, are they aware of the fact that there is water weight going on in addition to whatever's happening on the fat side of things? Or are we just, there's not enough good information out there for people to understand that that's just what happens?
Unfortunately not. Like, it's not, so there is a lack of information, but information alone doesn't change behavior. So there's still this like weird emotional attachment to the scale. The amount, like, even if you explain things, even if I'm like, look, here's a bottle of water, if you drink all of that now and step on the scales, like, you're going to be a pound heavier because you just had a pound of, and they're still like, I can't believe I weigh a pound heavier after I've sucked my calories. And you're like, it's not like, if you've sucked your calories, it can't possibly be body fat. And then the realization that like to put on a pound of body fat is like 3,500 calories. So not only would you have had to go, just slightly not suck your calories, you would have had to go like significantly over to have put that on overnight. Yeah. And this is the other thing I'm always speaking to clients about, is that if they come to me and they're like, I don't know what's happened, I just put on 3 pounds overnight, I'm like, great. Because there's absolutely no way that can possibly be body fat. If you come to me and you're like, over the last month, I put on 3 pounds, I'm like, that might be body fat, right? Because you might have consistently eaten in a surplus. But like short-term weight fluctuations should be quite reassuring because they mean nothing.
If we just dig into the science a little bit, it's just, is it the case that it's physiologically not possible to put on 1.5 kilograms of fat overnight?
Yeah, well, I mean, you would have had to eat, what is that, like 10,000 calories extra above your basic above your energy expenditure. So like I'd have to eat 12,000 calories in a day. Now, if you say I've not gone over my calories. Like you might be a little bit out, but you're not going
Right.
to be 12,000 calories out. Like that would be quite impressive,
Right.
actually.
And also there's must be different kind of like conversion efficiencies in people between, you know, however many calories are over their base requirements and how much of that becomes adipose tissue. Like, or is it just the case that because of physiology, it's the same for everyone?
I imagine there is differences, but if you think of it as in all extra energy has to go somewhere, right? So even if you are like, and you're right, you might be slightly less efficient, like people who, I don't know, eat, like if you're eating a lot of meat and you get meat sweats, like you're actually producing a lot of heat as a byproduct of the meat that you've eaten. So it's not that the energy's disappeared, but it's produced as heat as opposed to being stored as calories. Now, you're certainly not going to like negate all of the calories from the meat that you've eaten with heat sweats, but it's just an example of it's not quite 2,000 calories in, 2,000 calories stored.
Yeah.
There are, like we were talking about, caloric availability of food is an issue, is like a factor to consider as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely fascinating. So we've talked about what you're currently doing now. How did you get from the USN sponsored athlete to what you're doing now? And also you've got multiple businesses and you're a successful entrepreneur. So it'd be great to hear the journey.
Yeah. I think I got less and less interested with my own physique goals and more interested in other people's and in growing businesses. And what really drives me is impact. So I was like, how can I impact the most people possible? You
did get quite far with your own physique though, didn't you? There's like this photo of you on the internet in insane shape, isn't there?
Yeah, but I mean, and sure, like that's an achievement, right? But it's just so like fickle and surface level. And to me now, like even seeing other people do it, like I just think we were talking about this before, but like life balance and where you can put your efforts, like the amount of effort that people put into going from like very lean to like ridiculously level of lean is huge. And the benefit you're getting from that is like nothing. If anything, sometimes it's detrimental, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if then I just kind of changed and pivoted and put that effort into business.
Yep.
And I guess that's what changed for me.
Love that. There's also like, if you're in really good shape, but you're not totally at the extreme, everyone thinks, oh, you look really good. Whereas if you get absolutely like shredded, male or female or however you identify, you really only get the kudos from other people who are in that kind of band, because everyone else just thinks it looks really extreme, because it is, right?
Yeah.
But when you're there, you maybe don't realize.
And it is interesting because a lot of personal trainers think that what will help their business is competing. And I'm like, it's the worst thing you could do for your business. One, unless you're a prep coach, you're going to alienate like 99% of your client base. And then like, if you want to do anything to an extreme, it's going to take up time, energy, focus that you can't then put elsewhere. So if you want to prep and like, that's extreme and it's going to put, you know, your relationship with food, your relationship with other people, your business, your career, whatever, it's going to put all of that tested to the extreme. You have to make sure it's worth it for you. And I'm not saying it's not, like, this is everyone's choice to make. But I think laying the cards out on the table and actually coming back to your original question, which was about when someone wants to take it to the next level, this is kind of a discussion I had with them. Like, what are your values? What's most important to you? And is this actually in line with those things? Now, I think people are a little bit too black and white with like, well, if you want that, you can't have this. But I think drawing like lines in the sand beforehand and being like, this is still going to be important to me. So if I find that I'm cancelling on, I don't know, business meetings to go to the gym, then I'm going to say like, that's too far. Like those are sort of like barriers that I have. This is my priority and this is like a secondary thing. And like, I still go to the gym every day. Like I love exercise. I'm still in pretty good shape, but it doesn't take up half as much like time, effort, mental capacity.
Right. The training for you every day, is that to look a particular way, or is it to enable you to perform in your capacity now as the leader of your businesses, or a bit of both?
Honestly, I don't really care too much about looks, but that's because I stay like relatively in shape. I don't know if it'd be different. If I put on a lot of weight, then yeah, maybe it would be for a period of time. And actually, I had back surgery a couple of years ago and I put on 32 pounds, which for someone on a small frame is like a lot.
That's
so then
you couldn't move?
I was on a lot of drugs. I couldn't move. Yeah, like, and then obviously there's just like an emotional like trauma with that, especially when, and being like realizing that so much of my self-worth and coping mechanism for any emotion was going to the gym. And then when that's taken away, it's like, oh, so like I probably ate my feelings a little bit more, and I like had absolutely no energy expenditure because I could barely walk for periods of time. So I did put on quite a lot of weight with that. And then I lost it after. And so I would say for that period of time, there was probably like a physique focus. But now it's purely because I feel better. I have more energy. I show up better for other people. It gives me like a brief period of time where I'm not on my phone or doing the next thing or reading something. And
on your own podcast, which I encourage people to listen to, you talk about showing up quite a lot. What does that mean?
So I think I talk quite a lot about like how you show up and how important that is. And in different contexts for different people, it will mean different things. But it could be like the mum who's showing up for the family, or like how they show up for the family. So it's not just about like being there, but it's how you are there. And actually, you might find this research quite interesting. It's kind of about placebo effect, and it's a story I tell personal trainers quite a lot, because they're often like, I'm showing up on social media, why am I not getting results? Or something along those lines. And actually, we were speaking in the car and you were like, couldn't someone just like steal all your ideas or like take all your workouts and like just do this stuff themselves? And I'm like, yeah, they could. And I don't hide anything. Like if someone wants to do that, they absolutely can. And actually, a lot of personal trainers do my courses, so they probably do to an extent. But it's not just what you're giving, it's how you deliver it. And a really interesting study on this was they had two doctors, and they gave everyone in the group like a histamine shot. So they had a small allergic reaction. And then they gave them a treat. Well, one half got one doctor, one half got another doctor. Now the first doctor was a medical student, didn't really make eye contact, was like a little bit nervous, like was fumbling with the blood pressure cuff. And then they put this treatment on this little histamine shot. Then the second doctor came in and was like Harvard Medical School, was like made eye contact, very warm, very competent, no fumbling with anything. And they just said like, this is some treatment. It's going to help you with this rash that you have now. Now, what was interesting is the first doctor, there was no impact of that treatment whatsoever, no benefit. The second doctor, there was this reduction in redness and soreness from the rash. And then to put like another layer onto this, that was a placebo treatment. So there should have been no impact from either. So just how you show up and how you deliver. And I talk to personal trainers about that, and I'm like, that's like your training program. That's like your nutrition advice. If I gave two people the same advice, but one of them I was very sure, very competent, very warm, I listened to them, they felt heard, versus another one where I was like, no, just do this. It's on a Word document, go away. It is like, it might be the same information, but because it's applied in such a different way, it has a very different response.
Love that. So what do you do to show up at your best every day?
Exercise.
I could also tell you what I do, but let's hear.
I think yours is more in depth. So I do have a little morning routine, but it's very chill. It's like I get up way earlier than what I probably need to get up. So like that first hour of the day, I like just to me.
What time's that? Just out of interest?
5:45. And then I go to the kitchen, put on the kettle, and while the kettle's boiling, I do 3 sets of 10 pull-ups with press-ups.
Oh, this is more intense than me already.
Yeah.
But that's fine. Yeah.
And then I get my coffee and I sit down and I usually write.
3 sets of 10?
Yeah.
Damn, man.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
This is impressive.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then and that's actually how I measure my physique as well. So I don't weigh myself anymore. It would mean nothing to me anyway. But I'm like, if I can do 3 sets of 10, there's no way that I'm overweight or like out of shape, you know? So that's like my measure.
It's a great indicator.
Yeah. Or even when I'm a bit ill, I'm like, can I still do my pull-ups? And when I can't, I'm like, no, it's like today is like a day off kind of thing.
Chill.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So we're now at what, 6 something?
Yeah. I mean, that takes me like 15 minutes. So like, yeah, 6. And then from 6 until 7, half 7, depending on my concentration span, I'll just usually do more like of the creative side of stuff, like try not to open emails until like closer to 7. Right. And then at half 7, I go to the gym with my flatmate. And then we're back at work by 9.
And you're ready for anything.
Yeah.
I like it. Mine is kind of similar. And it's pretty much the same in some respects. So waking up very early, it's classic. Going to bed early if possible. just feel really, really good. If I can get to bed 9 or 10 o'clock, feel really good. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, not feeling good at all. 2 o'clock, doesn't happen very much anymore. When I was doing the doctor thing and trying to build a company at the same time, there was a lot of that. And in hindsight, it was just doing me no good. I wasn't really showing up at my best. I was showing up and just naturally, I think, have a lot of energy. So I was coming across reasonably well, but wasn't showing up at my best. So get up early, try and not look at my phone. As of yesterday, I've just invested in an alarm clock, which will allow me to remove my phones from my room.
Wow.
So thank you very much. Yes, I'm looking forward to that because my phone has been my alarm for a long time. I've got 6 years of tracking my sleep on this alarm app. And it's really, there's some interesting things. I don't mind sharing them. I can tell you where in the world my sleep is at its worst. Ibiza. By far. Like you can see it on the graph. It's really funny.
I didn't know you could see like locations.
You can on Sleep Cycle.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I can get it up now and take a look. It's really funny. Apparently when it's snowing, I sleep better.
Oh.
Yep.
Do you think that's because it's cold and you've got like the big duvet on?
I think there's an element of that. I really do. So how do I get it up?
And if you were in the UK, it's just dark, isn't it? Because like in the summer, you're waking up at whatever 5, but it's already light if you're Dundee, Aberdeen way.
No, you're right. I'm trying
and then in the winter, it's like doesn't get light all day.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Apparently, I sleep at my best in Saffron Walden. I don't know where that is. I don't know. Crawley, Vienna, Paris, and Rome. Huh. And I sleep at my worst in Ibiza. Second, Berlin.
Standard, yeah.
Third, London. Affected by weather. Snow makes me sleep better. Rain makes me sleep better. Clear sky, I sleep worse. So that's really...
But it must be the
look at that
impact.
massive red bar for Ibiza.
Wow.
It's like,
It must be the impact of the weather on even things like when you go to bed. Like if it's cold, dark, rainy / snowy outside, then it's fine going to bed at 9.
There's an element
if
of
it's
that,
still light in the evening, I'm like, I can't go to bed.
Yeah. No, it's difficult. So, and then it's varied over the years, but typically it's a walk and a stretch at the moment. Sometimes it's training, but the challenge is that I like, and we're talking about this in the car, like the plate loaded machines. I've done the powerlifting, but had sore knees, sore hips, sore shoulders, sore everything. And when I moved to plate loaded machines, all my pain disappeared. And a lot of, so for example, with shoulders, I don't really do much on the machines, but I do a lot of the cables. And I don't have really any pain. I also do loads of yoga now, and that's been really good as well. So it varies between training in the morning, training in the evening. There's always a walk to kind of clear my head. Try not to look at my emails. Also try not to look at emails before bed, although it's very difficult. Because then it seeds your thoughts and you're like, oh my gosh.
So something I do is like a brain dump before bed.
So what is that? Sorry? You just literally do a brain dump and you just write everything.
Yeah. Like, or
interesting.
Or like plan my next day. So what needs done the next day, because then I feel like you can just let go of it. Otherwise, I think one of the biggest fuels for anxiety for me is what, like if I'll forget something. And because I've got numerous different projects going on, I'm like, I will 100% forget something, which is why I like to kind of write everything down. And like my Google Calendar is like absolutely beautiful. It's all color coded. Like almost every hour of the day is like taken up with something. So I very much like live by that, which is probably a bit sad, but
that's interesting. That sounds very organized.
Yeah.
But if that's what gets you into a state of tranquility or control, then it's the right thing for you. What about the rest of your day and the rest of your week? How do you arrange your clients? How do you arrange your food? All that kind of thing. Because you've got so many years now of being in good shape and also helping lots of other people. So how has it impacted on your own routine?
So I think people go through phases or like seasons where, and it would depend what else is happening in your life. Like my life right now looks very different than it did at uni or than it did when I was working in person as a personal trainer. And you have to kind of adapt to what life throws at you. Or when I'm traveling, it looks obviously very different than when I'm here. So I think I'm quite versatile now. Like I'm good at just adapting to what I need to adapt to. So as much as I have like a relatively set routine, I can change that routine quite quickly, and I absolutely love routine. But as soon as I land somewhere else, I'm like, right, like what's the routine going to be? How does my day look?
Got it.
Recently, I've changed that because I noticed I do like training later in the day, but I would go in and I know that I had like, it would always be something had run late, and now I only have 40 minutes and then I'm going straight into something else. And I was like, the time I know that no one will book anything is before 9 a.m. So that's when I train.
I'm the same. I can't train during working hours. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It just does not work because your phone's going ping, 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 and you're working on something important. You go, oh God, I got to train. I wish I'd done it in the morning, or I wish I was doing it in the evening. Does training in the evening impact on your sleep negatively or positively? Like if you're getting really amped up, lifting heavy stuff, or go for a mad run or some mad cardio?
I think so personally, no. But I mean, when I say evening, I don't think I'd ever go to the gym after like 7 p.m. But I think some people do, and it's kind of individual. I think so many things with sleep is individual. Like, there's really funny research that people who drink coffee late at night are better sleepers. Yeah, everyone gives that face, right? But then you think about, okay, that makes sense, because anyone who struggled with their sleep wouldn't drink coffee late at night. Anyone who doesn't struggle with their sleep would be like, yeah, I'll have a coffee, because they know that it's not going to impact their sleep. Whereas people who are like, I always really struggle, I don't have caffeine after 12. So that, I guess, good example of like correlation, not causation, right?
But it's just people who have it like late at night.
Well, I mean, look at Italians. They're like after dinner, yeah. But then they don't sleep till quite late, do they?
You're right. And there are people that I go to these conference dinners quite a lot after conferences.
Shock.
James McElroy wisdom. There you have it, guys. There you have it. If you've taken anything away from today, it's that you have conference dinners after conferences. And people slam it down at like 9 or 10 at night. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know if I could do that, but maybe I could. I've never really been someone who struggles sleeping unless I'm stressed, and then it has a really noticeable impact on time it takes to get to sleep, amount of time I'm awake during the night, and how I feel in the morning. Stress is not good.
Yeah, I always feel like you can get away with one night's bad sleep. In fact, I often feel like I have more energy the next day if I've not slept well. You've been on like one night out, and then the next day you're like, oh, I'm totally fine, I can do this all the time. And then it's the night after, you're like, no.
Then you crash, then you're done. You have to retire. How did you go from getting interested in helping other people with their physiques to where you are now? And can you give some insight into the various different businesses that you're running? Okay,
so I still really love helping people, whether it's get in shape, but more just like get healthy, feel better about themselves, invest in themselves, and like see themselves as worthy of that investment, and improve people's like relationship with diet and food. Like dieting doesn't have to be miserable. So that will always be like a passion of mine. The way that that's developed is I now also run a business with a business partner, Amelia, and we teach personal trainers how to teach nutrition. So that's a nutrition education business. And then I also mentor personal trainers on how to build their businesses. And these are two key areas that personal trainers don't get a lot of support with. So it's almost like, oh, look, this is what you can charge for PT, get your course. And then like you're just expected to know how to run a business, how to attract clients, how to treat those clients, how to serve those clients best, how to retain them, like how to sales, marketing, all this kind of stuff that you're never actually taught. And so I kind of stumbled my way through all of that. And over the last 10 years, like I've learned a fair amount about that. So now I'm kind of teaching those people, and hopefully they have a much smoother ride than I did, and they get there a lot quicker.
Yep. I love that.
But also like coming back to wanting to impact a lot of people, and it going from just like, oh, I wonder if I can get in shape, to like, I wonder if I can help other people. that's the next stage of that. Because like I can only work with so many people.
Right.
If I'm helping other personal trainers to build their businesses and work with so many more people, like that has an even bigger impact.
Are there enough personal trainers in the UK?
I mean, there can always be
Should
more.
everybody have one?
Not necessarily. I think I don't want to the last thing I want to do is put barriers up to people to exercise. I think they're underrated. I think a lot of people are like, oh, personal trainer tells you to do some exercise. There are some that are like that, but there are some absolutely phenomenal personal trainers or coaches that are so much more than that. And I think until you've experienced that, most of what you get from a personal trainer isn't tangible. Like it's having someone who supports you, who understands you, who listens to you, who believes in you before you believe in yourself, who understands that it's not as easy as like telling you what to do, and that you have these barriers and helps you break down those barriers and helps you get back on track when inevitably you fall off track, because that will happen at some point. That's like what a good coach does. But a lot of people are just like, well, don't they just like give you a meal plan and some workouts? And for sure there are personal trainers that do that, but that's not the personal trainer I'm talking about.
They can be unbelievably effective if it's done correctly. And there's a bit of a push now for GPs and hospitals to prescribe personal trainers, isn't there?
Yeah.
You heard much about that?
Yeah. So I worked briefly on like a GP referral scheme. For some reason, they don't massively work. And I think part of the reason is because you're often pushing people down like the stages of change funnel before they're ready.
Right.
And I've never got good results with people who, I mean, most people listening will know someone like, oh, maybe it's your mum that you want to get into exercise and you've been trying to force her to do it. She has to be ready to do it. She has to be ready to change. So I would never approach anyone for personal training. I'd be like, you come to me when you're ready.
Right.
And if you're not ready to change, there's not very much anyone can do to help you change.
Is there anything we can do? Or is that like the $1 million question to help someone change? And I'll give you something fun to think about. So one of the reasons I think people don't exercise, and we talked about this right at the start, is because it's hard and they've never felt what it feels like to sort of feel really good after exercise, because they're usually just sore and they feel dead. So do you think we're ever going to be able to replicate the feeling of exercise in a pill or a tablet? Or is it too biologically complicated? There's too many pathways going at the same time.
I mean, people try, right? There's huge like drug efforts of like exercise mimetics, and in some ways, like some drugs do mimic exercise on some level, not in terms of the feeling that you get, but in terms of some of the responses.
The benefits.
Yeah.
Do we have any good weight loss drugs?
And now I can never say the word for this, but there's like a appetite suppressant, which seems, is it semaglutide?
I'm not sure.
Something similar to that, which seems to be effective for some people. And again, there's a lot of like misinterpretation around this, that it will just allow you to eat whatever you want, or it's cheating, or something like, again, like really short-sighted like that. What we know from genetic research is that some people have a higher drive to eat than other people, thus they're going to struggle to lose weight in comparison to other people. Now, I see that as like leveling the playing field. If you're someone who has a significantly higher drive to eat and this drug can reduce that drive to like normal levels, how much easier is dieting going to be? So I think for certain individuals, like there is certainly a place for this. But for other people, like we were talking about metformin previously, a lot of the benefits you're going to get from that will be, you know, you'll get even more benefits from going for a walk after a meal. So, but people would prefer to take a pill because it's less effort, right? Do I think we'll be able to put that into a pill? Like, I don't know enough about like how drugs or like how drugs are developed, but it would be very hard to do.
Feels like too big a task, doesn't it?
Well, there's just so many impacts, isn't there?
For me personally, I'm a kind of nothing is impossible guy, but that one I think is very, very, very hard. I read some research recently and it kind of made me laugh a little bit. It was in animal models and it looked at all these sort of novel longevity compounds and molecules and drug candidates. And they compared them to exercise, and exercise trumped them all.
That's mad. I love that.
And
You'll have to send me that study.
I need to find that. And it kind of made sense for me.
Yeah.
And it made sense for me because exercise is a whole body thing that just can't be replicated through a pill, because you're sort of moving and there's blood flowing to these areas and those muscle fibers are under stress and your nervous system is firing and there's stresses in different parts of the bodies. There's the endorphin element that we talked about, and it probably switches on lots of genes which have lots of downstream beneficial effects. It probably impacts on your microbiome. There we go, I got it in. And but no, seriously, I just find it not impossible but highly implausible that a pill would be able to do all of that. Maybe
And
if it
I
had
think
little
we don't
robots,
need it to, though,
little
right?
robots inside, and the robots go on and switch things on and do things. I don't know.
You know, I mean, I could maybe, it wouldn't be a pill, but you could have like electrostimulation.
You've seen those things, yeah?
Yeah, where you're like,
Do
do you
they
know what?
work?
Just what, like the ab thing that you can work.
They were a
no.
big thing a while ago when you sort of
Yeah.
had that thing on your pet. You could buy
Do you
them in
know what?
Argos.
There was one really weird study because I looked that up and I was like trying to get proof to prove that they didn't work.
The thing
And
that
there was
tenses
one
your muscles and your abs. And they sort of made things jump up and down.
electromagnetic, whatever.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But I looked it up
works.
to try and find research to prove that it doesn't work. And one of them found like this insane improvement in, I think it was like bench press strength and plyometrics. And I was like, oh God, that's don't post that one.
I am just imagining myself in my office sort of tooled up with lots of electrostimulation.
Yeah.
I think our team would really sort of conclude that I finally totally lost it.
Do you have a walking desk?
I don't, but I know what you're talking about. The little thing that you can put
Under your desk.
under your desk and you stand up. I've got a standing desk, so I could do it, but I do a walk every day, and I feel like
You don't need to be
I
constantly
don't
moving.
really need to I don't think I need to be like walking all day every day. But I know what you're talking about. I think for some people it could be good. If some people say they don't have time to go for a walk, well, if you're at your desk and you're working, that sounds like a pretty good time to go for a walk.
Well, this is the really, like, most people's biggest barrier to exercise is time. And there's research now to show that even doing 2 10-second sprints on a bike will improve your insulin sensitivity.
Okay, so everybody's got time.
Yeah, everybody has time
That's
to
20
exercise.
seconds.
Yeah.
Anybody who says they can't do 20 seconds, I don't know
Or
what to say.
I mean, it's a little bit like cheeky, but when people are like, oh, I don't have time to exercise, I'm like, do you have a TV?
Do you have a TV?
I don't actually have a TV.
I don't have one either.
No.
I don't have one. I've not had
But
one
my
for
point
years.
is, like, you sit down and watch TV.
Yeah.
And this is the thing people don't understand. And I know it's going to sound like holier than thou and blah, 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 but you will actually make time back on your life by exercising. So the amount of time that you like lose by spending it exercising, you will gain in like health years going forward. And even in terms of productivity, what's really interesting is a study that looked at people who took 30 minutes at lunchtime to exercise versus people who didn't, and their productivity in work after their lunch break. And the people that exercised were significantly more productive to the point that they made up that 30 minutes. So like, for example, if you gave all of your employees 30 minutes, they would actually be so much more productive afterwards that they've made up for that 30 minutes that you gave them anyway.
I love that. I mean, I've done my best to promote exercise at Robotics. We had yoga in the offices. We do subsidized gym membership.
Nice.
We allow people to claim gym expenses back if they're traveling, which I don't think many other companies do.
Yeah.
I don't know how much further we could go other than, I don't know, subsidizing a PT, or I'm not sure, but that's fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's hard because it's similar to like the GP referral. Like you could be like, we're getting a PT in and you all now have a PT. And some people might for a while be like, oh, great. But so much of the benefit you get from personal training is you investing money in yourself. And
so
actually you then show up to that. Right. So if you're like, here's a free thing, one, you devalue it. And two, like part of the benefit is the investment in yourself, because then you're like, this is how serious I am to change. I'm willing to put like my hard-earned money on the line.
That might explain why the social prescribing thing is not so good. Because you're right, on that sort of continuum of, I'm not ready to change, I don't have a problem, to I'm ready right now and I want to do something about it.
Yeah.
You're getting people when I suppose they've been to the doctor, so maybe they know.
Yeah, so sometimes GP referral, I'm not saying it doesn't ever work, but it's usually like a 6-week thing that
Right.
you've got for free. And then after that, if you want to continue, you have to pay, right? Now, once you've got something for free, you kind of think, I'm anchored to the price of nothing. So now you're asking me to pay whatever it is for this personal trainer. And realistically, you can get crap personal trainers for, depending on where you live, £20 an hour.
Yeah.
If you're very good at what you do, you end up charging more, right? So
Like
then you have
like
this
a barber,
experience of like,
hairdresser,
yeah,
same
exactly.
thing. Yeah.
I mean, anything really.
Makes a lot of sense. So, what are some of the most dangerous myths at the moment that perpetuate within the fitness industry?
Okay. Well, I'm interested to hear what you think on this one as a doctor.
Okay.
Have you heard of the fat doctor? This is what she calls herself.
No,
No.
I do not know who that is. Sorry.
So she's got a very big social media following, and her whole message is that storing too much body fat doesn't have any impact on your health. And
Sorry,
actually,
what?
yeah, no. I have to quote
Surely
quote a tweet because this is amazing. She basically claims that we would have evolved by now to deal with that amount of. Who sent me this?
I'm struggling a little bit with how this argument could be constructed sort of robustly.
I mean, it kind of can't. I think it plays a lot on like weight stigma, which is real, and emotive elements of people that are overweight. And the way that I like to approach it is like, I don't really care how people look. If they want to look a certain way or if they want to be overweight, then that's their choice. I mean, if anyone wants to be overweight, that's your choice, right? No one's telling you what to do.
Sure.
But equally, to say to people that it won't have a negative impact on their health, especially as a doctor, like I don't understand why that's not like malpractice.
Yeah. I mean, it's sounding a bit dodgy. I don't know. I have not seen that before. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's quite
I
a
can
big.
see why that's very controversial.
There's quite a big movement, like the health at any size or like fat acceptance kind of movement, and I think that's quite dangerous.
Yeah, that does sound pretty dangerous.
Especially when you have people of that, you know, like who are you going to listen to on the internet?
Yep.
Me, personal trainer,
yep,
or a doctor. And 9 times out of 10, I'd say listen to the doctor over someone else that you're following on the internet. But in that situation, it's like someone with that level of like prestige giving such an awful message.
Yeah, that's not good. I'm really struggling with that a little bit. I don't know about the malpractice thing. I as you know, I'm quite far removed from that now, but it's sounding a bit dodgy. So there's the fat doctor. Is there anything else that's comes to mind that might be quite interesting to talk about?
They're probably all like a little bit
controversial.
Yeah. So the other thing that's very big is intuitive eating. Have you heard of intuitive eating?
No.
So it's
I'm
actually
quite far removed from. I used to be very up to speed with all the diets and wrote a couple of articles for Elite FTS and just was really deeply fascinated and interested in it. And then I found a new fascination, which was gut health and the microbiome poo. Yeah, exactly. How do we take this? I guess what's largely a waste product, but that's really a treasure trove of therapeutically active living cells. I mean, 50% of your stool is bacteria. 50% of the biomass that comes out of you, however often you go, are bacteria. You know, the colon is the most efficient fermenter system in the known universe, right? And there's other colons and other mammals that might be slightly more efficient at producing bacteria, but for our purpose, and that purpose is how do we take bugs and make them drugs? The human colon is the most efficient by far in terms of energy input, how often you can harvest, the diversity of microorganisms, the viability of the microorganisms. It's just incredible. Our man-made structures are just not as good, which is why I'm so passionate about, well, you know, let's try and make this as scalable and as safe and as effective as possible. And one day we can maybe deconstruct which elements are more important than others. And one day we can maybe move to some sort of synthetic, cultured, grown, starting master cell bank or whatever. But for now, it's about let's harness the power of stool Sorry, we've gone really off piste.
That's all right.
We were talking about something else. I've actually forgotten now because I've gone off on a spiel there about.
I think we were going to talk about if you'd heard
Apologies.
of intuitive eating.
Intuitive eating, yes. Sorry. Okay, back to intuitive eating.
Which actually I won't speak too much about, but essentially is a bit confusing because intuitive eating isn't just eating intuitively. It's actually like an 8-step kind of process with rules behind it and like an explanation for it. But I think a lot of people within fitness who have previously done very restrictive diets are now like, I want to do intuitive eating. They want to do it for weight loss. It's not a weight loss intervention. And then my issue with it is like the part of it which is just eating to hunger. And that's only one part of it. But I have a problem with that because of like, we know that some people are more hungry than others.
Yeah.
We know that we live in an obesogenic environment. We know that we don't move that much. We know that actually from an an evolutionary level, we are probably driven to eat more food than we actually need to avoid starvation. So if you are just eating to hunger, I don't think you're going to be eating in line with your energy requirements.
Hunger's probably okay. It's probably okay to be hungry, right?
Yeah. Now and again, yeah.
You know, we don't need to be sort of ravenously hungry for a long period of time, but it's kind of natural to be hungry. And
yeah, and actually, how much do you enjoy a meal when you're hungry. Before? Like, I don't like being like pretty much satiated before a meal.
No.
Like I like to leave long enough that I'm like, oh, I'm actually quite excited about this next meal.
Yeah. We had Andy Scott on this podcast a while ago, and he was saying that the on season is harder than the off season because the on season you're force feeding as a bodybuilder, and therefore you don't look forward to any meal at all, and you kind of feel full and a bit sort of unwell all the time. Now, each to their own. And I think it's incredible what these people do because it must take such mental fortitude and commitment to basically only feel good for 1 week of the year.
Which week's that?
It's the week in between.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it's certainly not on stage and it's certainly not like mid-off season.
What Andy was saying, I think, was it's the week between the on and the off, or the off and the on. It's that break that they have where they've done the show and they're about to start bulking up again, where they're not restricted in anything and their hormones have started to recalibrate. That does make you think,
I mean, is it worth it?
Well,
if you only feel good for 1 week a year.
For someone like you or me who's got other interests, like you want to build a big business, I also want to build a big business and develop a new medicine. My priority is not to be in the best possible shape I can possibly be all year round, or even just for 1 week of the year. My priority is, how do I stay as healthy and as fit and as strong as I possibly can so that's an enabler to my life's mission and vision for how I want to change the world. And of course, there's certain times of the year where you probably want to be looking at your best, the holiday being the classic example. But what I found is that my performance at work is at its best when I'm pretty much in my best shape, and when I'm doing everything right, as if I were doing like a really strict diet.
Yeah, and I think that's partly because you think about it less then. Like I say this all the time, I'm like, it's actually easier to diet when you're busy because there's no time to like sit and overeat in the evening. It's like, okay, well, I've got now 20 minutes to eat my lunch and I already prepared it because I knew I'd only have 20 minutes and this is what I'm going to have, and you don't think about it. You're just there enjoying it and then you move on to the next thing. Whereas if you've got like all day to kind of faff around and make stuff, and like it's a lot of decision fatigue that piles up with the decisions that we make around food. And so I like to be quite like structured, at least during the day. I'll maybe like change it up a bit for dinner, but during the day, like I think having a routine is certainly a bit of a superpower.
So do you eat the same thing roughly most days?
Most days, yeah.
What is that, just out of interest?
So breakfast is not that great. It's normally like 2 pieces of fruit and a protein bar.
Okay.
And then lunch tends to be like some kind of big salad. And then I'll probably have, and again, not ideal, but like a protein shake and sometimes some fruit. And then for dinner, I'll have usually a stir fry. Yep.
Sounds really solid. I can tell you mine if you want, but this
is
about
it's not
you.
About
it is about you. It's not about me. It's very similar. I basically just try and eat as much fruit and veg is available to me over the course of the day. And at the company, we have like almost limitless fruit and veg. So I have a punnet of raspberries, punnet of blueberries, some oranges, an apple, a couple bananas. Sometimes I have a protein bar, although I've never found one that gives me the best taste with a good profile.
They're protein bars, not meant to be.
I have actually, sorry, I take it back. I found one recently.
Is it?
His name has escaped me, but I found one recently.
Describe it.
Okay, I'll describe it to you, okay? And I have actually been on a bit of a mission trying all the protein bars I possibly can as like part of my duty as CEO, because we provide them, at the company. And recently I went into this place called Roots and Fruits in Glasgow. It does roots and fruits, believe it or not.
Shocking.
And there was a protein bar there, and it was like a homemade one.
Oh, well, how would I know
Well,
that?
no, hold on a second. I think you can, I'll find this out because you can buy them on the internet, I'm pretty sure. It looked homemade insofar as it wasn't a crazy branding.
Mountain Joe's.
No. And I bit into this protein bar, and I honestly
Changed your life.
I changed my life. I've never tasted anything so good in my life. In the context of a protein bar, just FYI, sorry, it wasn't the best thing I had in my life. In the context of a protein bar. And it had 20 grams of protein in there. Now, that's not the only macronutrient, but it tasted so good, I decided that's what we're going to stock.
Oh, wow.
At Team EBX. So I'm working on that now.
Going to get a little sponsorship deal?
Maybe. We drink a lot of kombucha as well. And then just to finish that off, always a salad for lunch, same as you. Eat more fruit, eat more vegetables. I have this green juice a couple of times a day. I have the athletic greens. And then for dinner, it's usually not a stir fry, but like a bean stew. And sometimes some pita, sometimes some halloumi, sometimes some fish. Very rarely meat now. But I'm basically just consuming as many plants as I possibly can. Yeah. And it makes me feel really good.
Yeah, I don't eat half as much meat as I used
Plants,
to.
man.
Plants
are just so good. Why are they so good? Seriously. Honestly, ask anyone that's done the plant-based diet for a while. Ask anybody who's eaten as much in the way of fruit as they possibly can and veg for a period of time. I guarantee you, they'll tell you they felt better. So,
I have no doubt. Yeah.
So if the government advice, and we talked about this at the start, was eat as many plants as you possibly can. The challenge obviously is cost as well, because it's actually quite expensive to do that.
Yeah.
Then I think we'd have a population who was looking and feeling better. I'm not sure the Glaswegian diet is very fruit and veg friendly.
No, it doesn't seem to be, does it?
But
Do you know what? Big on the Greggs here.
Big on the Greggs?
Yeah, like every Greggs I've walked past, there's like a queue outside the door.
I can't remember the last time I went to a Greggs.
I mean, I didn't actually go in, but yeah, there seems to be quite popular
Someone
here.
told me recently that they watched this video of an American influencer that was in Greggs, and he was like, I'm in this really cute pastry shop. It's called GR Eggs.
I absolutely love that.
It's called GR Eggs. It's really cute, guys. Apparently that's what he said. Anyways, the best thing for your microbiome is to eat as many plants as you possibly can, and fermented foods. The kefir, the kimchi, the kombucha, sauerkraut, all that really good stuff. Just eat as much as you can. And really, are you going to go over your calorie limit just eating loads of fruit and veg?
Good luck on the sauerkraut. Try and eat as much sauerkraut as you can.
It's probably going to be pretty hard, right? It's going to be pretty hard. Anyways, sorry, bring us back to you, Emma, because you're the guest, and I just get carried away when we get to microbiome stuff and diet.
I like it.
I'm sorry. I had a list of questions which I've not even looked at.
God, that's how good we are at chatting.
And given that time is now, I suppose, running quite short, shall we just talk about a few of these things? So one of them is you work with a lot of women who are menopausal or post-menopausal, so they're not
Peri-post, yeah.
Peri-post. And pre.
Just women, generally.
You work with a lot of women.
Yeah.
So does any of the advice change as women are going through the menopause and post-menopause and so on and so on? So
everything becomes more important. So, and you also need maybe a slightly bit more protein. I also like to, depending on where they are in their exercise regime, actually shorter, sharper workouts are better for many women. Recovery from exercise is a little bit harder, but actually exercise is even more important because we know that the drop in estrogen can impact muscle mass and bone mineral density, which is mitigated at least a little bit by exercise. So that's really important. The nutrition side doesn't massively change, but even more important is the protein. So like everything is the same, but kind of becomes that bit more important. Couple that with it also being potentially the hardest time of a woman's life to go through. And, you know, anyone who's experienced just like PMS symptoms, you'll know that that's really tough. Now imagine that like on steroids times 100 and fluctuating estrogen levels that don't fully make any sense. So you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. You often get a lot of side effects like lack of sleep, which can also impact hunger, which can impact mood. Estrogen can impact, or drop in estrogen can impact mood as well. Hot flushes, like there are a whole list of symptoms. The most important thing to me is to treat the person, not the disease or the period of life that they're going through. So if I treated every perimenopausal woman the same, it would be ridiculous, because actually some clients I have kind of sail through the period and don't have that many side effects at all. Other women, it is deliberating and completely changes their life for a period of time until they maybe go on HRT or maybe like things settle down for various reasons or various treatments. But it really depends on the individual and what symptoms they have and how they're coping with them and how I can help support that. I mean, again, like the number one thing to do is focus on lifestyle changes. That's like the first port of call. But you're asking people
and
to
those lifestyle
prioritize.
changes are what we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah, or just like diet, essentially diet and exercise, right? And getting in enough sleep and like looking after yourself a bit, getting in enough exercise and movement. But it's also simultaneously potentially the hardest time in your life to do that. Right. So
that's tough.
You can see how that that is a challenge.
Just maybe a good time to find a trainer like you who can help, right? And who understands. No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you take any supplements?
I take vitamin D. I take fish oils. I take creatine. I think that's it at the moment. And then protein, which I don't really see as a supplement, but I guess.
These are the most evidence-based supplements? Like, should everyone be taking creatine in your opinion?
Unless there's a specific reason not to, like significant kidney or liver issues or something. But even then, I would just speak to your doctor first.
Right.
Again, like, it's not essential, but could you ever get like saturated creatine stores without taking creatine? No, you'd have to eat like a ridiculous amount of meat, which then would impact everything else you could have in your diet.
You're not getting them from the plants.
You'll get, so this is what's actually very important. If you do have a primarily plant-based diet, or you've reduced the amount of animal products that you're consuming, taking creatine has a huge benefit, and not just from a building muscle standpoint, but actually a cognitive benefit. So they see that in vegetarians, people who take creatine have increased cognitive ability. I think that's saturated in people who are meat eaters generally, in that when they take creatine, they don't see this elevation in cognitive function, essentially meaning that vegetarians probably have lower cognitive function if they're not taking creatine. You don't take creatine, do you?
So interesting. I actually
just judging by your facial expression.
I'm very animated, and I think that's so interesting, which is why I'm being animated. I do take creatine, but I'm quite sporadic with it. And when I do, I tend to take like 10 grams, which is double the 5 grams, but I'm also much larger than some people and But I had never thought of creatine as a cognitive enhancer. I'd always thought of it as a kind of musculoskeletal performance enhancer in some respects.
Yeah, there's actually really interesting research in terms of dementia and Alzheimer's as well, reduction in risk, but it's quite like preliminary, I guess, and hard thing to study over that period of time, but there is like mechanistic rationale for it.
Oh, that's amazing. So basically, yeah, everyone should, men and women of all ages should be having a creatine supplement. This is really cool. And then the other ones, the fish oils, the vitamin D, these are both evidence-backed as well, right, for a variety of different things.
Yeah, so like I'm definitely not going to get enough sunlight if I intend to stay here for the winter. And the fish oils is mainly because I don't eat a lot of actual like any animal product. And so I probably am getting almost none from my diet. I also take B12 as well.
Makes sense. Is there anything else that's backed by good, robust evidence?
Yeah, I don't normally suggest much more than that. I think it's very easy to sell a pill.
It
And
is.
even when I had free supplements, I didn't take any more than that. Like I just like even when they were free to me, I was like, I don't see that there's enough evidence behind
It's
this.
really interesting. That's fascinating. I'm looking at the clock and we've got somewhere to be after, so we should wrap up. So I'd just like to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having
taking
me.
time out your day. It's been really interesting. And if people want to follow you, how do they find you?
So on Instagram, it's at ESG Fitness, or on any platform really. And then my website is esgfitness.co.uk.
Fabulous. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.